Good afternoon. Welcome back to the B&H virtual event space. Today we have the wonderful Cristina Mittermeier joining us, photographer, marine biologist, conservation advocate. What don't you do? You do everything. Cristina, welcome.
Hi, it's so much fun to be here, Derek. Thanks for having me.
No, look, it's fun for us. I feel like, look, I love all of our guests. I love all of our guests, but there's certain guests that we have on that I'm like, the honor is all ours. It's such a pleasure to have you on. We've, of course, followed your work for such a long time, as so many people have. And it's always an added bonus when, we interview a lot of photographers and they're just photographers. And it's like, okay, cool. You create pretty pictures. But when there's meaning behind the work, it always hits a little deeper for me. So let's not start right there. Let's go back to the beginning because I kind of have an idea, the whole photography thing, and the photography thing wasn't first on your plate. How did you develop the interest? Like, when did you know? Was it from a young age that you knew you wanted to get into biology or marine biology?
It's such a boring story because I am not like one of those cool photographers that got a brownie from their dad. I got books from my parents. And I think it is, books and reading and being exposed to the curiosity of the wonders of our planet that initially sparked that interest in just knowing more about how it works. And like so many girls, I had this fascination with marine animals like dolphins and whales, and I fantasize about being able to swim with dolphins. So that was the initial impetus for being a marine biologist. But it quickly transformed into this understanding that what happens out at sea, especially with the industrial fishing fleet, is not okay. And it's invisible to most people, but it is so devastating for the future of humanity. So when I was 18, I witnessed the industrial fishing fleet of trawlers in the Gulf of California and what they do to the ocean. And I made a decision that I wanted to do everything I could to try to stop it. So that's what I've been working on for the last 30 some years. And initially, I thought I was going to be a scientist, and science is just such a difficult discipline. It takes so much time and collaboration. And then in the end, people don't often read the scientific papers. So I
Mhm.
stumbled upon photography by accident. I used to share office space with a photographer, and I could see the power of what he was doing. So I thought, maybe I'll be a photographer. Mind you, by then I'm already in my late 20s. So
Never too late to start.
now, especially photography, right?
Yeah, no, and I feel like that's one of those things that I wish I knew then what I know now. Because similar. I think it was really the late 20s. I don't even count the time. It's like everybody had a camera, or you were around a camera and growing up, but you never really took it seriously, or at least I didn't until the same age that you did. But I look back now and it's like everything I know now, if I was able to tell these stories and have a grasp on storytelling back then when I first started, because for me, I don't know how it is for you or how it was. Was it more about the visual impact of a photo, or did you really start telling stories from the moment you picked up a camera?
Now, in the beginning, it was not really about stories. It was about this urgency of translating the science into something that was more palatable to a general audience. And this photographer that I used to share a space with, he was making coffee table books with his photographs about conservation. But he didn't speak English, so he asked me for help, and I came in, writing captions and translations. And when he launched his book, which was sponsored by a very large Mexican company, there was like these big gala, and people came in, and they had all these beautiful tables. You can imagine them where they had the book open, and people could browse the pictures. And I could see that people were looking at the book and they were looking at the photographs, and they were not reading my brilliant text. They were asking questions about the things that they were seeing. And I thought, wow, science is a very difficult language for most people to overcome, but we're all visual communicators and we all
Mhm.
understand images. And so people feel comfortable engaging in a conversation through the images that they're looking at. They're asking very human questions. Were you afraid? How did you take this picture? Was this animal dangerous? Well, that's the first step in establishing a dialogue. And I thought, well, maybe this is the pathway, the interest that the public has in photography and photographers.
Mm. Yeah, it's almost like you reverse engineered the secret to success, because normally it's a photographer and it's a photographer who has that visual gift, and then they learn about their subject matter. And it sounds like in your case, it's like you already had the subject matter down. You had the knowledge, you had the educational and the technical chops. And now it was just a matter of how do I take what I know? And photography really is, it's an art of translation. It's getting the layman, the layperson to understand all this complicated language and all these complicated ideas in a form. It's like for me, I liked picture books when I grew up. So photography was always natural, for me. I could pick up a coffee table book and hey, okay, I kind of get what's going on now just because of the pictures. So do you feel is that kind of how it was where it was just a matter of translating all this difficult terminology into something that any other person can understand?
It was when I was young, when I was growing up, the planet is always a difficult place. But back then it was about the war in, I mean, I even forget, it was a famine in Eritrea and children starving to death and Cuba. And I mean, there's always all this turmoil. And I read a book by a woman named Susan Sontag, who used to be Annie Leibovitz' wife. And Susan wrote about the power of photography to bring the horror of war to our living rooms. And she challenged us to not look away at what was happening in far off war spaces and to have empathy for others. And I thought, there's a war happening on biodiversity, and I bet we can use photography the same way. And the image that I formed for myself is, as a photographer, all you are is a membrane, a semi-permanent membrane that's allowing a conversation to happen between the thing that's being photographed and the person who's looking at the photograph. And you're just trying to make a connection, and that's the job.
Mm. It's always been one of the interesting and complicated dynamics I've found with photography that has purpose behind it, whether it's, what you're doing or war photographers. It's like you take these things that are can be so terrible and you have to tell, I'm going to put the air quotes up, a beautiful story. And has that been a challenge for you as far as taking something that really isn't, there's nothing beautiful about it, but you have to try to kind of evoke some sense of positivity or maybe hope is a better word.
So it's a two-pronged response. So on one side, I realized early on that when you confront people with just the horrors of what's happening, people very quickly reject it. I
Interesting.
remember those TV commercials about the children that needed food or whatever. I mean, it's not human to look at that in the eye. So I thought, we have to create a different sense of a journey that's going towards something more positive. And I took a cue from Martin Luther King. He didn't start the famous speech by saying, I have a nightmare. He told
Mhm.
us what the dream was. And I thought if my photography can be a reminder that the planet is still alive, that there's still magical wild spaces in many parts of the world that are still worth protecting, not just because they're beautiful, but because our very lives depend on it. I thought, that would be a great positioning for my photography. And the other part of the response is nobody stops to look at mediocre work. If you want to stop people in their tracks and compete with all of the other visual and digital noise out there, you better make remarkable work. You better make beautiful photographs, even if the subject is horrific.
That's one of the beautiful things about it when you take someone who is clearly as eloquent, educated as you are, but you had to be a good photographer at a certain point, like you said, if the images, if you're not able to create, because I'm gonna probably get flamed for this online, but not everybody can create a beautiful image. Some people just see differently, and it's more about not just creating a beautiful image, but taking what you feel and making someone else feel it, and helping them see your vision. And you're able to do that so well. So I think that's a blessing that you have both sides of the coin there, because I think one without the other doesn't really resonate as much.
I think of all the art forms, photography is one of those that really requires you to access your left side of your brain, where you hold your analytics, your mathematical knowledge, because photography is very technical. And for me, I knew that I wanted it to be artistic, but step number one was to understand what is it that the mechanical apparatus that I'm holding can do and how does it do it. So learning photography and how the camera works was the first step. And once you start developing a bag of tricks, then you can see a scene and figure out how best to utilize all that knowledge that's very technical
Mm.
in, in seconds to make something that's different and beautiful and interesting.
Well, now that we're there, I got to jump to the underwater thing because it's one thing to navigate on land, just from a technical standpoint alone. I can't even imagine going under it, even if I had like a lighting crew, which you guys, it's not like you guys are going underwater with lighting techs. You had to learn how to light underwater. And some of these, I can only imagine how murky it is. And to still get top tier images, what was that learning process? Can you take us through that a little bit and how long of a learning curve it was?
It was one of the most frustrating things to learn in my life because you're right, it's very difficult, it's very expensive, and it's very difficult to access. Animals underwater are not as easily accessible as on land. And of course, when you're diving, you only have 1 hour worth of air in your tank. So you better, think through things quickly and make it happen. But I was really lucky because I didn't become an underwater photographer until I met my partner, Paul Nicholan, and he already was one of the most iconic underwater photographers. So he really fast-tracked for me the knowledge curve and put me in the water without coddling me too much. It's just like, okay, swim or drown, and, and there's an orca, and figure it out. And I think being not an accomplished, a good technical above water photographer really helps in overcoming the many challenges of working underwater. But you also have to be a very good water person and have water skills to, to stay alive. So the combination of those two, it's really hard. And yet, there's a generation now of young people bringing their cameras underwater and doing extraordinary work. That tells me, that it is becoming more mainstream. It's becoming more available. Of course, the new equipment that we have available now, the new sensors that allow you to break through that murk and the darkness, is really made it possible. So I'm glad, that there's young people behind us.
Yeah, definitely. I know I told you we're not going to go too deep into the tech, but yeah, that is one of those things where now the power of continuous light sources. It's like, and back in the day,
I saw you can push it so hard.
it's from like you said, the ISO, the sensors, to I can only imagine how heavy, back when you first started lighting underwater, it's like the you didn't have like now you can get these little small lights that you can carry and they probably kick out 5 times the power of something decades ago, and you're not carrying. I love looking at the old pictures and it's like you got the huge scuba helmets and the giant, it looked like theater lights, like they got giant Fresnels.
And you had no control over the light.
Mhm.
Even when I started, the strobes were so primitive in how you control the amount of light that they spit, and the slide would go everywhere. Now the new technology allows you really to, make sharp decisions with your light and determine how much light you want from each strobe independently. And the fact that you can look at your little, screen in the back and assess your exposure is so useful. Back in the day when you had, 36 frames in a roll of film, well, that's it.
Yeah.
It's recipe for disaster.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that, like Paul's line, swim or drown. Like
Swimmer down,
you only got an hour air, you got 36 exposures in that roll, you got to make it happen or else.
And of course, he's such a hungry, accomplished photographer that he wouldn't even look back to see if I was coming. He has to make his own images as well. So I
Mhm.
think that really helped me to say, okay, nobody's going to come and hold my hand and help me show me how to do it. I better figure it out. And I'm going to say the first couple of years, it was very frustrating and the failure rate was almost 100%. So
Mm. I think there's something to be said learning from the best. I coach baseball, young kids, and it's like I always tell them you got to play up a level. If you play with kids that are younger than you, play with kids that aren't as accomplished, you're going to play down to their level. So it's like as frustrating as it was, I mean, you're learning from Paul Nicholan. You're gonna get there. And it's you're having someone who is accomplished, someone who is incredibly looked up to by the community. So at least you're learning the right things and you're not wasting time going off in an odd direction.
so true. And he's such a harsh critic of work too. He holds himself to a very high standard. And of course, Me too. And so, yeah, you learn very quickly. But, now we're almost 60, Paul and I. And this thing about underwater photography has become like physically very challenging
Mhm.
because the equipment that we use is so much more sophisticated also. So we don't do scuba diving anymore. We do now something called rebreather diving, which is a very complicated machine that strips your CO2. You're recirculating your own breath
Oh,
basically.
wow.
And you have to scrub the CO2 and inject oxygen into a loop that you're rebreathing over and over and over again. And so oxygen can be a very toxic substance for humans if it's not at the right concentration. So, you have to be thinking about that as well.
I'm having an asthma attack just thinking about that. It's like there's no worse feeling than when you're short of breath, and all the asthmatics out there, we all know that
Yeah,
that's one of those things that, yeah, it is a scary feeling, and that throws off everything else. You can't think straight at that
no.
point. I
And
want to
we
know for
kill you.
you, as far as goals are concerned, how do you what is your how do you measure success, or what does it look like for you hitting your mark and setting further goals?
This is such a great question, Derek. So this is something else that Paul and I do together as a couple. We do goal setting and very serious goal setting. And every year, I have a notebook that you pull out and you look at your goals from last year. And these are very different than your resolutions from New Year. These goals are categorized. So every aspect of your life need to have a series of goals. So your fitness, your diet, your relationships, your work, and then very specifically, my technical ability underwater, or, you know, whatever it is that you're trying to accomplish, you need to set very specific goals that you can measure progress against.
Mm.
The amazing thing about goal setting is that when you bring out that notebook a year later, you go, oh my God, I achieved so many of this. And you can actually check them off your list and make new goals. And you have to be pretty specific. How much money do you want to make? And be specific. And it's amazing, surprising just how it becomes a North Star that becomes so easy to follow.
Yeah, and I love how many of those things are not related to photography. It's like you mentioned, life, fitness, and there really is this interconnected nature of who you are as a person versus who you are as a photographer, and how one thing kind of feeds the other. And if you're not sound as a person and you don't have it all going right up here, the photography kind of it
Yeah.
clings onto that, and it takes the same direction.
Well, you can't really, especially the kind of photography that we do. It's lucky that we do it as a couple because we get to travel together and be together. But if you were a solo photographer, you're leaving behind the spouse and children and household for weeks or months on end. It can be really difficult. So having these types of goals makes it so much more achievable and understandable. There's
Mhm.
consequences to the work that we do. And for Paul and for me, it's easy because we're a couple and our children are grown. And, if we die tomorrow, we can say that we have lived very full lives over and over and over again. And we're leaving nothing on the table. It's been a grand ride. It's been amazing.
I love that. It's like you already have that's you have the mental locked in, and it's that frame of mind. And I think that frame of mind, what you put out there is what you attract. It's a thing of vibes and energy. Do you guys do a lot of personal work or any personal work at all? I mean, you're super busy. It's funny. I was talking with Kate when we did a pre-production call, and I'm sitting there and I'm asking Kate, and I'm like, how? I'm like, I get one or two jobs and I'm stressed out. And I'm like, well, I got to pick my son up from school, and then I got to go here. And then it's like, I wanted to be busy with work, but then I get busy with work, and it's like, I can't handle it. How do I mean, and you're traveling all over the world. I'm not even doing that. How do you keep your sanity? Is there any personal work involved in that?
There is, and this is the biggest lesson that I learned that really allowed me to make a successful career as a photographer, and that is to hire people around me. Even when it was difficult and I wasn't making that much money, hiring that second person that is going to help with the tedious things that you shouldn't be doing as a photographer, like invoicing or writing contracts and all that stuff, all of a sudden frees up your time to do the thing that only you can do, which is to be the creative author of all these intellectual magic. The rest of the stuff, hire other people to do. And so I have a team that helps me with my website and with writing and with administration and with travel. Well, otherwise, I would not be able to succeed at what I do. And yes, the weight of supporting the business is on my shoulders, and I have to make enough money to keep all these people employed. But somehow, delegating and hiring allows you to do that. And trying to do it all yourself, it's really limiting.
Yeah, totally. I think that was one of the defining moments in my own career was learning when to say. I think as photographers, we have this want or we this perceived need that we have to have control over everything. And once you learn to lose a little bit of control on little things and delegate, it does. It frees you up and you realize you can get so much more done. I love how you put that. You can do the things that you can do, that only you can do. And there's certain things you can delegate that anybody could do or that a trusted member of your team can do, but there are certain things. So for you, what is something that you only you could do, you can't delegate?
So one of the biggest things for me is going into my photographic archive, because as photographers, anybody that tells you that he's killing it or she's killing it is lying. Failure rate continues to be 99%. To come up with something that's beautiful and unique and really speaks to your artistic goals is very difficult. And the only person in the world who can go into those archives and tease out the things that I think are going to be beautiful is me. And then I play around with my limited knowledge of Lightroom to create a reference file of what I think this image should look like. And then I give it to a professional to do the professional editing and turn it into something that will be printed and that will, fetch a very high price. It cannot have mistakes. It has to be a high-end product. So yeah, delegate again.
I love that. See, look, maybe I am doing something right because I feel the same way on my work. I'm like, I can't delegate. Only I know
Yeah.
which image. Now, that leads to the next kind of thing is back to the storytelling. How do you decide which stories to tell, how to tell them?
Because conservation is my North Star. If we can achieve the protection of landscapes or species or indigenous knowledge, then we're making progress. And our job as photographers is just to keep highlighting those stories. So it becomes a very opportunistic activity.
Mm.
You can spend a lifetime fighting to stop a dam or to create a national park, but it's going to take years. And I think this is one of the biggest realizations, is that conservation is a marathon. It's not a sprint. And so you have to have many pots on the fire and the opportunities present themselves. Conservation requires the talents, the skills, and the input of thousands of people that are specializing on the science, the policy, the politics, the communications. And you come in as a photographer to tell the story, but not just that, you're also coming in to be an ambassador for the thing. Because as photographers, we have this unique ingredient, and that is that we become the spokesperson, the storyteller, the ambassador for the thing that we have photographed. And a lot of photographers think that just making the images and putting them out to the world is enough, but it isn't. You have to take those images and use them as leverage in your storytelling to convince the people that need to be convinced, or to bring on board to the conversation. And that's something that people forget. As photographers, you don't get to be invisible behind the camera. You have to, put yourself in front and become an activist and an advocate. So
I love that. That's such a great approach. So how much how do you divide it up? I mean, like we had said, you're an activist, you're a conservationist, you're a biologist, you're a photographer. How do you divide or your time up? Are you still, is it like continuing education? Are you still, studying it, and so that you're making sure that you don't become too much of a photographer and lose sight of the scientific side of things?
for sure. So what I have is, several irons on the fire. I'm working on the development of a new marine protected area in the Gulf of California in Mexico, which is where I went to university. And this is 30 years in the making. And finally, all the pieces have fallen into place.
Mm.
And I get to be in the middle of it with my photographs and my stories. And if it happens, because it will happen this year, that our Mexican president will announce this new marine protected area, it will be the culmination of decades of work. I cannot just be sitting around waiting for that one thing to happen. I somehow now am inserted into African wildlife conservation because people have, pigeonholed me into this ocean thing, but that's just one of many things that I'm interested in. So now Paul and I just came back from Kenya and Tanzania, where we're helping to further the reintroduction of black rhinos to landscapes where they have been missing for decades.
Oh, wow. Love
Now
it.
these orphaned elephants that are victims of climate change and drought and are being rescued in this amazing facility, they need help raising monies. We insert ourselves into these stories that kind of fall into your lap. And I think the way that it happens is you achieve a reputation and people call on you to come and help. And then you get to pick, where's my skill set? Where can I be added value? Where do we see a conservation win that we can actually help push? And that's how it goes. It's very intuitive.
Yeah, I didn't even think about that side of things of being you must be just be inundated because of the reputation that you and Paul have, and not just for being great at what you do, but I think to be successful you have to be able to see around the corner. And I think both you and Paul have been able to see around the corner and stay ahead of the curve, and that kind of puts you at that top echelon of what you're doing, where you're not just out there. There's no sense of it's about you or it's about Paul. It really is. And I think a lot of people, you can kind of see through that thinly veiled layer of, okay, there's a lot of ego under there. There's a little bit of activism, but there's a lot of ego. And I've never seen that in either of your work. So I think that, you know, a lot of people see that as well. And they see that, this isn't it's a lot there's a lot of money involved. There's a lot of funding. There's a lot of bringing these funds in. And so when you have people who are clearly good at what they do, a lot of people are able to say, hey, we're going to reach out. Everybody wants a hand in the pot. I mean, is it something, is that another thing that is personal to you and Paul, where it's like, okay, we can't put a team on that. We got to see what we're good at, where we're going to donate our resources, or even where you're going to stake. Because at the end of the day, your future reputation is staked on, well, what do we align ourselves with? Are we going to get involved with something that maybe we're taking a chance on and it might come back to burn us? How do you guys kind of parse that?
Well, let's take it back to photography, because at the end of the day, wearing a superhero cape and trying to save the planet is not an excellent way of making a living. There's not a lot of money to be made in that kind of work. So in order to be able to do that kind of work, you first have to be a successful photographer, and you have to have a photography business that's generating the income that you need in order to have the bandwidth to go and be a goodwill ambassador for all these things. So one of the things that we think about is, can we create art that can live on somebody's wall,
Mhm.
by engaging with this project or that project, because we don't get a salary from our nonprofit. Sea Legacy is, if anything, a resource drain, that doesn't pay us. It can't. It would be a huge conflict of interest. So we have to find a way to support it. And then you create a piece of art. And I would feel terrible if we went and photographed something amazing and then sold it and wouldn't give some of the money back to the thing that we
Mhm.
photographed. So you're trying to create this circle of giving back while you're making a living. And I go back to a concept that I learned early on in my career as a photographer. It's a Japanese concept that's called ikigai, and it means finding the purpose of your life. And your ikigai is the confluence of the thing that you love, which is the thing that you're good at, which is the thing that gets you paid so you can make a living. But importantly, is the thing that the world needs. And when you find these four things together, then you're off, you're off and running. And nowhere in the ikigai is this is good for my ego. So
You said the magic word for me. I'm a big Ikigai person. And
are you?
again, because and again, this is something that comes with age and experience. Like I going back to starting photography later, it's like I wish I had the same life approach. Forget photography. I wish, 20-year-old me, 25-year-old me knew what I know now as far as finding your life purpose and finding what's truly meaningful. And it's like, especially in so many ways that social media and global media at large is a good thing. It could be beneficial, especially for what you're doing. It's easier to get it out there, but there's so many ills of it. And there's so many things where it's like you can be so easily distracted. And next thing you know, you're 15 years down the line, and you're like, wait, I don't live forever. This isn't a video game. There's no unlimited lives. What the hell am I doing in life? Like, do I even know who I am? I don't know who I am. I've been chasing an idea that I thought I wanted, and so I'm very big into that idea of finding your purpose, finding your intent. So now I got to ask you, because I personally feel like same thing as goals. I get to where I'm like, okay, I know who I am. And then I do some deeper soul searching. I'm like, no, I'm still not there. I look at it more as a journey and not a destination. And I keep learning every time I think it's a destination, I still have further to go. Or I change as a person, and it's almost like I'm chasing the true identity of who I am, and it keeps me motivated. Can you talk a little bit about your views on that?
Absolutely. Paul and I are going to be 60 in the next few months. And Paul's mom passed away kind of abruptly a couple of years ago when she was 76. And so Paul and I sat down and thought, what we do is so dangerous. And it has been really, truly, we've lived amazing lives of purpose and just adventure and the opportunity to spend time with animals. But when you look at 60, what you're looking at is 20 summers left, really. And a lot of
Mm,
people will say, oh, no, it's going to be longer. But truly, by the time you're 80, you're pretty much challenging your mobility and your ability, whatever it is. We have 20 good summers left on planet Earth. The end of the ride is near. How do we want to spend that time? And so we've had to make a really big adjustment into what we expect to do with those last 20 years. And one of the important things, I think, is to just get out of the way and make room for young talent to occupy the space that we occupy now. I
love that.
I know a lot of photographers that kind of like cling on to these thing that they've been doing until well into their 70s and 80, and good for them. But that's just not going to be us. So yeah, having an adjustment of your ikigai and learning how to say we have done enough, we've done our share, and it's time for us to slow down and maybe look at a different angle in our work. And for us, that angle is going to be using our art for conservation. So not much has changed, but I do want to be a little more selfish with that thing that I'm photographing, because with the last 20 years of your life also comes retirement, and we need to think about, how do you survive? So all of these things come into play and question, and none of it has to be about ego. It has to be about being deliberate in the way that you live.
Wow, that was a master class in how to think, how to live. I love that you're like, now I'm like, man, I got to start planning. Now I got to write down. I'm like, you get to your mid 40s and you really start to think like, okay, I only have an
We'll
X
have
amount of
time.
years. I still got a little bit of time. It flies. It flies.
Yes,
So
it flies. It's going to be over before we know it, and
yeah.
I don't want to leave anything unsaid and undone. But I don't want my tombstone to read, "She toiled until she died."
What's left? Is there anything hanging out on the bucket list, or is there a place that you and Paul haven't been that is
Yeah.
still on the checklist?
So very selfishly, Africa. And I think for both of us, the driver, the main reason for doing this work is just the love of wildlife, just the selfish desire to spend time in nature. And so these last 20 years are going to be all about that. Where can we go that we can spend endless days just in the company of animals? And I think Africa is going to be that for us, but it cannot just be, oh, we're hanging out with elephants. How do we use everything that we have to help elephants, to help these animals that somehow, every creature on planet Earth needs support. So pick any, really.
Yeah. So this might be the same answer, but if I had to, if you had to tell somebody one place to go, what's the one place that you have been that you're, if whether it's a specific place or a continent or any place where you're like, if you can go there once in your life, you would tell everybody to go there.
There's two places really, and one of them is really difficult to photograph now because of the circumstances, and that's my home country of Mexico. One of the photographers that I most admire is Graciela Iturbide, who is now in her 80s. But she photographed the indigenous people of Mexico back in the 1940s and 50s when you could still travel to these small communities. So I'm gonna have to leave that on, on the to-do list. And the other place is my current home, British Columbia. This is one of the most magical places for both wildlife and indigenous people and landscape and Canada. It's just an amazing place to photograph. So I look at my archives and I go back into my pictures and I just wish for more time. I wish I could go back to some of these places. And now that I know more, now that the equipment is better, I want to do it again. But, you know, can't do it all, Derek.
Yeah, definitely. How often do you look at your archives? Is that something where you're doing it constantly, and is it of more of a, or is it more of a nostalgia? Is it reminiscing, or is it what's the reason behind looking in your archives?
It's very funny. So I sit here at this desk, and underneath me, I have my 200 terabytes of archives, and I am looking forward to a summer at home where I can selfishly sit at this desk and just go through old shoots, because you have to think about your work as a photographer, and a lot of it has been done under commission, or you were, on assignment, and you were shooting for another reason, and you had to deliver a certain spec of work. But in there's also jewels that you didn't look at the time because you were not thinking about fine art. So it's worth looking at. And this time around, I'm going to go look and I'm going to delete for the first time. I have all my
Really?
files from the beginning, but I just want to save the things that I like, a fat edit of the things that I think have potential and their accompanying raw files, and discard everything else. So 20 summers left, Derek.
20 summers left. I know. I'm like over here writing it down. I'm like, I'm doing the math. I'm like, okay, so do I have like 35 summers left? I got 35 summers left. So I was thinking about it the other day. I'm like, I'm already into the second half. I'm like,
Mhm.
we've already hit past halftime and it's go time now. And I think of so many things. And this was such an invigorating conversation for me. And I love that this was about life. This was about really just seizing your life. And I think that's kind of interwoven into the work of what you do and everything. Again, it's that dichotomy between the professional and the personal and the photographer and the person, and really one thing feeds the other, and I'm looking at it now and I'm like, yeah, there's so much left to do, and the time
Mhm.
isn't getting longer, it's only getting shorter.
Think about a photographer like Sebastian Salgado, and he died in his 80s, but I don't think he left any stone unturned. He was successful in achieving every single professional goal that he had, become one of the most iconic photographers ever, and at the same time go back home to Brazil and reforest an entire ecosystem in his spare time. I'm pretty sure he died a very fulfilled individual. And when I think about the kind of photographer I want my life to emulate, that's Sebastian.
Mm. Do you ever find a lack of inspiration? It's interesting because usually this question is towards somebody who fashion, editorial, commercial, street. We all don't, but I feel like when there's meaningful work, I'm like, I'm sitting there and I'm like, well, it's human to have not necessarily lack of, maybe be in a rut.
Mm.
Do you get in a rut as much when you're doing meaningful work? I would think that it's hard to be in a rut like someone who's doing still life can get in a rut because their work isn't that meaningful. But when you're doing meaningful work, like what does a rut look like?
I think it's more of a creative conundrum than a rut. Like I'm in one right now. I really, really want this African wildlife adventure. Paul and I are both so excited to go spend time in Africa. He's a pilot. He wants to fly again. We want to do aerial photography. And the question for me is, when you are stepping into the footsteps of incredible photographers who have worked in Africa before, think about Peter Beer, think about Nick Brand, even David Yarrow, the Jouberts, how do you inject something that's uniquely yours into that conversation without copying their work, without, just co-opting what's been done before? And that's the conundrum that I'm trying to solve these days. I'm excited to be sitting here because I'm surrounded by all my cards that I just brought back from Africa and try to come up with something that's me and that it's a unique contribution. But I don't think it's a rut, you know. I think it's just like a problem solving.
I like that, a conundrum. I'm gonna have to kind of co-opt that from you. A conundrum. It sounds so much better. A rut sounds like you're at a dead end and you're stuck. A conundrum is just more like I know there's an answer and there's a way out. I just got to find the door.
Well, we're photographers, right? So we're problem solvers, we're puzzle makers. You just have to be a detective and work backwards.
Definitely. Well, Christina, this was such a good conversation. This is just what I needed. This came right on time. To all of our viewers and everyone watching out there, make sure if you are in the tri-state area, I'm even going to say after talking to you for the past 45 minutes, if you're not in the tri-state area, book a flight. Christina's presentation, keynote speaker at Build coming up between two worlds is going to be June 17th at 10 a.m. on the main stage. I'm gonna have to find a way. I don't even know what I'm doing during Build. I don't know where they have me, what they have me doing, but I'm gonna have to find my way and sneak in there and watch this because this really was. This is just what I needed, and I think this was just as much about life as it is about photography and conservation and learning to really maximize your time on this earth because you never know when it's over.
You never know, Derek. And in addition to the keynote, I'm also doing an amazing panel with my dear friend Amy Vitali and with one of my original inspirations, Franz Lanting. So I'm very excited about that too.
I love it. All right. Well, if my boss is watching right now, I'm going to need a little extra time down there on the show floor. And Christina, huge thank you to you again. We wish all the best to you and Paul, and we look forward to seeing you on the 17th. Of course, if you guys aren't familiar with Christina's work, you should be, but her website is in the description of this YouTube, and we hope you check that out. And is there anywhere else where are you and Paul big on keeping up the updates on Instagram, or is the website the best spot?
Very much. Instagram is our main form of communication. Together, we have 10 million followers that are enthusiastic about photography, but also conservation, wildlife, and human rights. My Instagram, because Mittermeier is so hard to spell, is at Mitty, Mitty.
Doesn't get any easier than that. Mitty. So huge thank you to Christina once again. I wish you guys all the best. Look forward to seeing you in a couple weeks. And to all of our viewers out there, thank you for tuning in. This has been another edition of the B&H Event Space. Catch you on next time.